Well, let's move right to the issue, because on Tuesday of this week, the Director of National Intelligence issued a report on U.S. Signals intelligence activities and detailing all the things that the administration has done to make NSA more transparent and accountable, and announcing a number of policy changes, such as the length of time that certain SIGINT data may be maintained. But the central focus has been the collection of business records under Section 215 of the Patriot Act, which is what I really want to talk about today. Last Congress, as you may recall, Senator Leahy introduced a bill that would have ended NSA's bulk collection of telephony metadata, and that was narrowly defeated in the Senate. Now, the President wants the Congress to come up with a plan for housing the metadata somewhere other than with the government. Now, outside panels have, in fact, studied this question and have concluded, quite exhaustively, and have concluded that that is impractical. It's not going to work. A third-party storage solution is not going to be feasible. So that leaves the phone companies, but they don't want the responsibility. If the government needs the data, they reason, then the government should maintain and secure that data. You know, but don't issue laws or regulations that is going to pass that costly burden on to us. And there are 3 major lawsuits that are pending in federal appeals courts right now, which may find their way to the Supreme Court later this year, challenging the constitutionality of Section 215 of the Patriot Act, which authorizes the metadata program. And for now, courts are split on the question of whether the so-called third-party doctrine applies to the collection of telephony metadata, so stay tuned on to that. But for now, the hour is late, and here's what you need to know. Without reauthorization in some form, the NSA's phone records program is set to end on June 1st, less than 4 months from today. And how we decide this will be one for the history books. You know, in the beginning, signals intelligence was all about intercepting and breaking military and diplomatic communications codes. The exclusive foreign intelligence collection mission of NSA was clear and vital. And that mission is still exclusive, clear, and vital. What has changed is the way that the world communicates. And what has also changed are the threats to our freedom and security. It is the job of intelligence to warn what may happen, to identify what is happening, to help figure out what can be done, and do all of this before it is too late. Now, that job was difficult enough when the greatest intelligence concern was piercing the Iron Curtain to see into the plans and intentions and capabilities of a single superpower adversary. Today, there is a perfect storm of crises throughout the world at the very time that American power and influence are waning. The spread of Islamic radicalism in the wake of an American withdrawal, Russian aggression against Ukraine and the implicit threats of a nuclear-armed bear bombers across the English Channel and their spy ships back in Cuba, China's renewed belligerence toward its neighbors, the threat of a nuclear-armed North Korea or Iran, and the list goes on. And then, of course, there is this unsettling question that I'm sure here people in this room have contemplated before. Do you think that you are safer today than you were 10 years ago? You know, in 2004, there were, 21 Islamic terrorist groups spread out in 18 countries. Today, 41 groups spread out in 24 countries in a putative caliphate holding territory in Iraq and Syria and beyond. And for every ISIS terrorist killed by Allied airstrikes, a new recruit steps forward to join their ranks. Many of them fully intend to attack targets in the West, as citizens of Paris learned so painfully last month. And some have both the intention and the capability to attack the United States homeland. So what does this mean as Congress and our democracy debates the future of NSA? We'll consider this. In the months before 9/11, one of the hijackers was living in San Diego, where, as you may recall, he made 7 calls to an al-Qaeda safe house in Yemen. Now, NSA intercepted those calls, and it was part of their overseas collection directed against Yemen. But they didn't have the ability to capture the telephone identifier that would have told them where the caller was. And as a result, they mistakenly concluded that he was abroad. Had they known that he was actually here in the United States and passed that intelligence to the FBI, there is perhaps an alternate history that is possible where 3,000 people did not die that horrible Tuesday morning. This point was immediately obvious to the President and everyone in a position of responsibility in our government in September of 2001. If you want to know who the terrorists are talking to, you've got to check the phone logs. I like to call this dot connecting 101, check the phone logs. And in order to check the phone logs, you have to have the phone logs. So what is now known as the 215 program began. NSA acquires those logs, the billions and billions of transactional digits from the phone companies, who otherwise just dump them once they're through with them. The logs are stored in NSA computers, arguably the most secure digital storage site in the world. NSA is not permitted to run algorithms against that metadata to look for interesting patterns of something or another. And it certainly isn't permitted to listen to any of the content. The data just sits there untouched. When NSA has the rare lead of a reasonable, articulable belief that it has identified a terrorist phone number abroad, it gets authorization from the court to run that phone number against the logs to see if it links to any phones back here in the United States. And when that answer is yes, that information is passed to the FBI. The sole output is to identify connections. That is it. Now, how Congress approaches the question of whether this is to be reauthorized or continued, I believe speaks to the very essence of how our great democracy works. Quote, goodbye, Fred, I'll see you. That's all right. Among the many objects to which a wise and free people find it necessary to direct their attention, that of providing for their safety seems to be first, unquote. You may recognize the words of John Jay in Federalist Number 3. Just as the Founding Fathers built and trained and equipped an army and a maritime force, they recognized the compelling need for intelligence to warn of threats. So George Washington, in his first State of the Union address, asked Congress for a fund to support secret activities. If British spies in New York had been using their cell phones to call conspirators in London or Toronto or the Caribbean, do you think that General Washington would have said, oh, hands off, we can't track those calls? Do you think that the colonists would have objected? Or would they have seen it as part of their contributions as citizens to be a part of the vast metadata haystack, not to allow the conspirators to hide their sedition? The framers knew war. Most of them had been in battle. They understood danger, and they understood what it meant for individual liberties endowed by our Creator to be abused by an unaccountable sovereign. And that is why they designed a constitution to make the sovereign accountable, to place checks on the power of government, but also to ensure that government has the power it needs to provide for the common defense and to secure our liberty, and a constitution that would continue to work in times of crises. Each generation of Americans, our generation, has the obligation to advance our continuing experiment in democracy. It is not enough simply to assert our individual liberties. Our responsibility as citizens also requires empowering the government to act to keep us safe, subject to the checks and balances of our constitutional republic. Now, the metadata program was started under NSA's statutory authorities. It was approved by President Bush and continued by his successor. It was and is subject to careful internal checks to ensure that it cannot be abused. It was and is overseen by the FISA court in intimate detail, and any errors, such as all humans make, were and are immediately reported to the court. It was and is overseen and approved by the committees of jurisdiction in the Congress, and even before Snowden, the general issues at stake were debated and redebated openly when the Patriot Act and related laws were enacted and later amended and extended. I think it would be difficult to find an example of another government enterprise that was more carefully circumscribed by the checks and balances of the separate powers established by our Constitution. And I think it would be difficult to find anything that is done in cyber land that is less a threat to individual liberty and individual privacy. Look, I find the loss of privacy in today's digital world very troubling, but not because of the US government. You know, it's the cookies that enable some web merchant to track what I buy and send me tailored ads to buy more, or the manner in which the Apple Cloud insists on scooping up all of my personal data, and I can't opt out if I want my calendar and contact information to work. And it's the ever vigilant, ever ready Chinese microchip in my laptop computer, including the little extra that takes over the video cam and watches the room. These things trouble me. But do I have a sense that my privacy has been violated if my phone number is one among billions that the NSA computers churn through, looking for terrorist footprints? You know, at some level, I think that question is ridiculous. So as you might infer from my remarks today, I believe that the outcry over this program has been utterly self-defeating. It is helped along by some carefully orchestrated leaks and a not-so-subtle propaganda campaign by people who do not wish us well. This is not an assault on our liberties. It is an assault on our good sense. And the only beneficiaries are America's adversaries. So the program is about to expire. This may be the first clear test of empowering our limited government to act in cyberspace, but it won't be the last. And I invite your questions.
Michelle, thank you for what was, even given the high standard you've set before, an exceptionally powerful and much needed call to arms. Can I just ask you on an opening question? You have described a sort of looming peril in terms of this act being allowed to expire. To the extent that you are tracking this legislation and the opportunities, are you seeing people on the Hill who resonate to the warnings that you're expressing and who are seeking to do something about it? And if so, what is it that they're seeking to do other than beat back a Leahy-style piece of legislation? Do you know?
So the leadership has been, and both houses have been pretty clear that they support an extension of 215. And Senator Rubio, for instance, has come out and said, I think there should be a permanent extension on this authorization. The problem is there has to be an affirmative vote. The provision will sunset unless steps are taken. So there needs to be enough support to move forward to have the Patriot Act provisions extended. And I think that what is required is leadership on this issue and a little common sense. The thing that bothers me, I have to say deeply troubles me, is some of the utter misinformation and mischaracterization of this program that has been done. And I don't really understand the motivations of people who do that, but I am appalled sometimes at the characterizations that I hear of, well, the government is spying on you and people are concerned about invasions of their own privacy. But that's not what is going on here. And we look to our leaders. Democracy doesn't work. Representative democracy doesn't work unless we have responsible leaders who live up to their responsibilities, and that is to state things clearly and truthfully. And I do hope that that's what we see in the course of this debate, because that's sorely what we need. You know, the NSA's lawyer just this morning was asked the question, well, what are you going to do if there's no extension? And he more or less said, well, we don't have a plan for that. I'm speechless, but that's his position. Now, he did say, we certainly hope that we're not put in the position of having to come up with an answer because they want an extension.
Questions? Dan? Dan, right here. Sorry.
Thanks. I think you're more or less preaching to the converted here, mainly.
I'm sure I am.
Let me ask you, as a person who knows a lot more details about the NSA, and do you have any civil liberties reaction to all of these stories? I mean, I have the sense that the NSA tells everybody, including Congress, as little as they can, and for a good reason, largely, because a lot of things that are told to Congress are not as secure as they should be. Maybe you don't agree, but having been a former staffer for some of these committees, I don't know. But a part of me, even though I agree with everything you've said, has a civil liberties response, I can conceive of people like our current president and people that work for him seeking to do wrong things with our national security apparatus. And I worry about that in the back of my mind, not as much as I worry about the things you've talked about, but I just wanted to know, do you, as a person who's obviously most concerned about the terrorist threat, do you have any concerns at all about those kinds of things?
Yes, you sound like the founders, right? I mean, that has been the huge concern in constructing a government where the people are empowering the government to act in ways where we're not overseeing day to day what is being done. And so what is necessary is limited powers and checks on those powers. And I think what I'm trying to lay out here is, with respect to this program, the checks couldn't be clearer or better or more solid. And this administration, or any administration that sought to abuse this program, would have a hell of a time getting away with it.
Anyone else? Deborah?
Thank you, Michelle. I always love hearing you speak. This isn't really my area, but I just wanted to let you know, and maybe you do already, that I think that some of the problem is occurring within the conservative movement. People like Michael Savage, who are spewing forth on their radio show every day that the government is spying on them through these programs. So I think it would somehow, whoever works on these issues, might be helpful to at least try to get the proper message out to those who are supposed to be on our side.
I share your sadness at seeing that, and I fear that you are correct in your characterization of where some of the opposition is coming from, but I also hope that that means that there will be an opportunity to reach those people with a more patriotic view of what their obligations are as citizens as they think about the kinds of things that the government needs to do to keep us safe. Look, you know, the last presentation before I walked in here, I know you were talking about the Islamic terrorist threat. And I've recently had some rather in-depth briefings about the activity, about the situation in Iraq and Syria and the extraordinary difficulty that the United States is having, the West is having in dealing with this emerging caliphate. And I am not persuaded that we have a strategy that is going to result in the situation getting better. But I do believe that the caliphate, as it would have it, does have a strategy. And I think that a part of that strategy is not in theater to strike the strategic blow against us, but as U.S. intelligence has been warning, the strategic blow against us will be in the capitals of the West. And if we don't understand that now and put in place an intelligence net capability to identify and stop them, we will be paying the price soon.
Ben?
Without asking you to get political or partisan here, what is your read of the new Congress on the issue of the NSA? How confident are you that the folks who are newly elected in either chamber have a good handle on this issue and the need to reauthorize?
I think that the threat and what I just expressed as the imminent dangers are becoming clearer all the time, and that there is leadership emerging from that perspective saying this is not the time to be slitting our own throats. So that I think there's an opportunity for a more enlightened debate on the importance of this particular intelligence program than perhaps there was last year, for very sad reasons.
Michelle, am I correct in understanding what you're saying is basically that the president has asked for a change in the Patriot Act that would entail conjuring up some new cache for all of this data that will create a kind of context in which the leadership, if they are to do the right thing, will be saying to him, the hell with that, and we're just going to re-up the existing act as is. Is that what you're counseling here? And if so, who beyond the three folks, or I guess you've alluded to, the leadership and Senator Rubio, should we be focusing on to ensure that there is support for the right outcome?
And I would add to that, the leaders of the intelligence committees of jurisdiction, both present and past, from both parties have been the most outspoken, which ought to tell us something about the significance of this program and what it means. But what has happened is the president now has asked, the president has found something that he can't do by executive order. He can't require the phone companies to keep this metadata themselves by executive order. So he would like the Congress to step in and say, okay, we're not storing it in the government anymore. We are going to, by law, require that the phone companies store it. Now, why? What is the enhanced value to our security or to the efficacy of this program, to anybody's liberties for that matter, of having the phone companies store the data rather than the government? I submit to you that it is all superficial, that it is an ability to say, I know we have a problem, people have been objecting to this, so we're going to say we've made this big change, we've taken care of the problem, now everyone can be happy. And the fact is, I worry that if you require the phone companies to store the data, it is less secure by definition, and it's going to be less easy to interrogate when you have to go to many different repositories. And if you need to move quickly, you, the government, if the government needs to move quickly because we have found a lead on a number that's just popped up and we got to move now, I don't know how much longer it's going to take if you have to go around to the different repositories to interrogate it. Already, President Obama has directed that where previously 3 hops were permitted in checking the data, we will now only do 2. What does that mean? So you get a phone number of the safe house now over in Yemen, to use that earlier example, and you're interrogating it against the data. Where does this go to? It pops up in connections, in phone calls of a certain duration at a certain date and time to 6 different places in different parts of the United States. From those 6 different places, the second hop says, okay, who are those people talking to? And the third hop says, of all of those people, who are they talking to and when? And then if there are patterns that emerge from that, this same entity over here, which is in communication with this safe house in Yemen, had popped up over here from a place in Libya. Then you've got something interesting, right? So the president has said, no, we're only going to do 2 hops. Now, I don't know how to read that, how much is being lost. General Hayden says, in his professional opinion, that means that we're losing about 15% of the value of the intelligence program from that one change alone. So that change has been made. We're not even talking about that. Now we're talking about will these records be preserved at all? At all.
And is it your expectation that if the Plan B that NSA does not have at the moment has to be exercised, that that data would be eliminated?
That's one
As
possibility.
an immediate
Yes,
action?
I mean, the phone companies were not preserving that before. And the only way that it's now been preserved is because immediately after 9/11, on his own authority, Director NSA said, give me this stuff. I need to be able to sort through it and find out who's talking to whom, because we had a whole different security situation. And on his own authority, he did that. And of course, with the president's approval. But speaking as his own authority, he didn't require additional law or legislation. Later, that got codified to make it clear and explicit in the Patriot Act, along with other provisions. But it was like a no-brainer. We need to know who they're talking to here. Let's check the data. Let's be able to run these phone numbers that we know about against all this transactional data to see who they're talking to. And so it went forward. And it would have stayed like that, I think, wearing my conjuring hat, I think it would have stayed that way, but for the brouhaha over the Snowden leaks that was so sensationalized on this point. Now, the other 1.7 million documents that Snowden leaked, which had lots to do with sensitive military activities and a whole potload of other things that the Russians and the Chinese principally are interested in, that we're not getting much coverage on that, but we do get coverage on this.
Anyone else? I could talk to her all day, so I'm just happy to share this. Michelle, thank you very much. I think
Thank you.